Alexander Popp, professor in the Universität der Bundeswehr in Germany, in Munich, associate editor at JTCAM and AMSES. So we're happy to discuss about scientific publication. And the first question, what's your personal motivation to become associated editor in these journals at JTCAM and AMSES?
I mean, first of all, I think it's always important but that applies to many parts of our system, but to not complain about the state of a system, but to actually contribute and also change how the game is played. So, and I think we're all very well aware that the publication system has certain problems, and that I think both of those journals that were just mentioned, they have a different approach, but both of those journals have some ideas of maybe giving a new touch and a new alternative to the publication system, and to not just continue as usual. And that's the main motivation behind that. So to really contribute to those changes in how we publish and how we manage the publication system.
All right, thank you. Let's talk about your role at JTCAM.
Yes.
Because it's easy to align the discussion. So, in one sentence, how you would characterize the mission or the role of JTCAM in this modern scientific publication landscape?
Yes. So JTCAM is what we call an overlay journal, and it's also Diamond Open Access journal. So what that means is that Diamond Open Access, first of all, means that we publish articles free of cost for everyone involved. So meaning the authors and the readers. So to some extent, you could say that's the way it's supposed to be, right? Because we're all mainly funded by public funds, and so what's done in research should be beneficial for society and should be free for everyone to access and to work with. And but of course, having no cost for anyone also means that you have no revenue. So and that leads to this idea of an overlay journal. So you need to make processes that are involved in the whole editorial process, right? And publishing, you have to make those processes as simple as possible, based on certain tools, and overlay is one concept that is very important there. So meaning that you make use of those already existing preprint servers, for example, like archives and others, and do not have to build up a new IT system by your own.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's continue. I would like to ask you about your perception of perfect or great manuscripts that you receive for review. Mm-hmm. Right? Do you have some feeling? Okay, this paper is something that we must publish. Just looking through it, and this paper, apparently, it won't ever pass.
Well, I think this is kind of, you have to be careful. It's kind of there's two parts to this problem. I mean, first of all, if you work as an editor or associate editor, so if you're the first one to have a look at a submission, at a manuscript, I think it's important, and it's part of your job actually to make a first assessment, because that's what you're there for. And there's something like straight rejects, right? In some cases that might be very obvious due to very formal reasons, for example. Then you also have to look at the other side, right? So while of course as an associate editor, for example, you have to have a first look and make a first assessment, I think it's also important that you are careful about also that you know the limits of maybe your own decision making, because I think it can also be dangerous if there's too many decisions that are just made based on one person's opinion at this point, because there's not a clear yes or no on many of those manuscripts. So I think those first decisions should only be taken in very, very obvious cases, if there's fraud, or if there's if some very obvious requirements, formal requirements, are not met. But if it's scientifically valid to some degree, I would always try and go into a review process, and just to see if also the expert referees then share my opinion, or maybe have a different opinion, and I think that's very important.
Okay, thanks. Okay, another question about the same topic. When the paper is already published, Yeah, what's for you a good paper, which was worth publishing?
So that's a very difficult question. I mean, I think there's no rigorous definition of what makes a paper a good paper, right? I mean, there's many dimensions to that, and it could either be very strong on several of those dimensions, but it could also be very strong on extremely strong on just a few of those dimensions. I mean, for example, something that people might not be so familiar with, or in the past had not been so important, is if you provide your data or your software that has been relevant for creating those results on like an open source server, or like fair and accessible data. And so, for example, this can be one dimension of making a paper very valuable, right? Because it avoids that stuff has to be redone. It enables the recreation of results and making thus the results stronger. Of course, this does not mean that if you provide your code for free and you provide your data for free that it's already a good paper, because if the data and the code is rubbish, then it's still a rubbish paper. But what I'm trying to say is that it can be, for example, a combination of those features. So it's not just the best math or the best mechanics that make a paper a good paper.
All right, thanks. Now on the other side of the story, so as editor you deal also with the reviewers and with their work, right? So what's for you a good review and a bad review?
So again, no clear definition obviously, but I'm going to try to bring in some thoughts.
What's important for you?
So what is important for me in a review? So first of all, what is clearly important, and it should not even be important to even mention that point, but that it should be scientifically impartial. So meaning that there should not be some emotions involved, or some politics, or some I don't like this way of approaching it because in my group we're doing it differently. So that's obvious, but one still has to say it, and it happens more than enough still. So this is very important. And apart from that, I think if you read a review, mostly also as an author, I think we have this experience. You already see if the reviewer has invested time and effort into trying to understand the paper and trying to provide a strong review. And for me, this is much more important than, also if I'm an author, not just as an editor. That's for me the most important thing. So I'm not a big fan of getting a review that goes like, okay, you have to check those 3 spelling errors or typos, but apart from that, it's a great paper. I mean, I don't even like that, even if it was positive. So it should make clear that the reviewer has tried to understand what's behind, try to find strengths and weaknesses, and then also document those clearly. And I think that's the key, and that's also what should be expected from every reviewer. And I mean, a lot of reviewers they do this very nicely, but also, of course, there's a lot of not so reviews that are not of so high quality.
Okay, about the same story. So now the world is accelerating more and more, right? And the people are waiting for fast reviews, and sometimes prefer journals that publish fast than journals that do high quality but slow review. So what's for you the perfect cycle for review process? How much should it take? How much should we provide the reviewers? How much time?
So I mean, I have a very clear opinion on like speed of review, or reviews being very fast. I think this cannot be the solution. I understand why this might be something that one would like to have, but it's, I think, in most cases simply impossible. Because if you, for example, set a reviewing deadline for, if you say like, okay, you write a review within 1 week or so, I mean, most typically the work week of people in research at all levels, they do not allow for this. Because if you say I have to provide a review in 7 days, then basically how do you squeeze that in? Because it's not just 1 or 2 hours that you spend on a review, right, to make that very clear. And so I think that time should not be the most important criterion, but then again I understand that also it cannot be infinitely long, right? And so there must be some kind of compromise, but time should not be the most important criterion. It should be most about quality. I think many journals manage to recommend to their reviewers a reasonable amount of time, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and that makes sense, I guess.
All right, thank you. Another question, more general, about diversity in scientific landscape and publication models. So there are hybrids, gold open access, transformative agreement, diamond one. What's your vision of this landscape, this complexity of this landscape, and what you think how it will change in the near future?
Well, it's difficult to say how it will change. As usual, if a system is currently in a kind of a very dynamic or very transformative phase, and I think the publication system is in a very transformative phase. I think one has to start one step earlier, and I think what is most important and where we can contribute also as editors, as researchers in general, is that we explain a bit more what the system is all about. So that, for example, that we explain to young investigators, to young researchers, to PhD researchers in our group, to postdocs, what are the different possibilities, so that at least the complexity of the system is well understood. Because, I mean, you have to think about the next generation of researchers, and they need to operate in this environment. So at least it's important that they know about the different opportunities and about the different models and the different options, as you said, like with open access and all the colors that are out there. Because I think the most dangerous thing could be that you just inherit some philosophy from your PhD advisor, right? I mean, we've always published in this subscription journal, so sometimes they don't even know that there might be some challenges or disadvantages to this type of system. So I think educating young researchers about what are the pros and cons of all those models is step one, and then from there the next generation will take it.
Mm-hmm. All right, thanks. And in this respect also I have a question about the role of prestige of
Yes.
scientific journals, right? What's your thoughts about this?
Well, this is, I think, the one of the most classical and one of the most difficult questions to answer. I mean, that's whenever you talk to young researchers about this, the different publishing models, this is one of the first questions that they ask, and they are right to ask. So I don't think that there's an easy solution to that, right? Like all of those questions, there's never an easy solution. So yes, there is this kind of duality that is at least present today, that most of the so-called high prestige journals have some tradition, have some history, so mostly they're classical subscription-based journals, or nowadays maybe hybrid open access journals, and that maybe newer journals like Diamond Open Access or whatsoever, that they're struggling of reaching within certain metrics a level of prestige or esteem. And then it's very difficult to explain to young researchers why it might still be beneficial to go, if they publish 2 or 3 papers maybe in their early career, why should they put one of those papers, that's what they're asking, right? Why should they put one of those papers into a lower prestige journal just because it's right to do so? It's a bit, I think, like with climate change, right? I mean, it's kind of the same thing. So people of certain intellect, they understand the problem, and everyone would confirm, yes, we have to do something about it. But then if it comes to your own actions, and you have to accept that there's a large wind energy system next to your nice garden, then people start to complain. So it's a problem, and we have to tackle this as a community, right? And maybe one part of the solution is that we do not follow these classical metrics of how prestige or esteem is measured too closely, and that we do not focus on just some numbers that like impact factor or whatsoever as a pure metric of success in publishing, because that would maybe take that pressure away from the young researchers, and they would be more open to also new models, because they would see that it has an advantage for the system, for the scientific system as a whole. But also for them, it shouldn't be two disadvantages, right?
Yes. So, but nevertheless, you think that in current system in Germany, for example, it's acceptable that the young, early career researchers that publish some papers, contribute some papers to Diamond Open Access journals?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's acceptable, and maybe it also depends on the discipline a little bit. But I'm in computational engineering, computational sciences, and so, I mean, now I'm often on this other side of the table, right? I'm also more like in search committees for professorships, and at least I can report that in these search committees, it's never been like we're counting numbers, right? So I think this is not really happening. But maybe there's other disciplines or other places where this is still happening. But we're not like, okay, this guy had 5 papers, but they were all in like lower impact journals, or maybe in and this guy just had 2 papers, but they were in these high impact. I mean, both can be interesting, right? We have to look behind the facade, and so what does that mean? And but I'm quite positive actually and optimistic about that, because at least where I work and where I interact, I see that people take this seriously and they look at the person. If they make decisions for professorships, for awards, for whatsoever, and not just at the numbers.
Okay, great. Okay, by the way, do you know if DFG
Yes.
signed San Francisco DORA, Declaration on Research Assessment?
To be honest, I'm actually not sure if DFG has been doing that, or if they're thinking about it, or if they're not thinking about it. I know that, so I know obviously about DORA declaration. I know also that high esteem institutions in Germany, some of them, have signed it or in the process of signing it. I've heard, for example, from the University of Stuttgart. Most often probably it's pushed by certain people who are in charge there and who think that matches their philosophy. But I guess this is very important. On the other hand, as usual, we cannot solve, I think, the way of thinking by just defining or signing some declarations, right? I mean, that's for sure. I mean, just because we've signed this declaration that we're not going to do this or that, okay. I mean, it's like in some other situations where you say, well, we're not allowed to look at the quantity of publications. You're just allowed to put your 3 most important publications there. Well, then the first thing that many reviewers are still doing, they're going on Google Scholar and checking what else is out there, right? What's the H index, whatsoever. So I mean, the regulations and those agreements can, I think, help accelerate and put this process on a broader foundation. But at the end of the day, it has to be a change in the way the majority of the people in the system really think and perceive the situation.
Okay, thanks. Another question about scientific landscape again. So, you know, there are big publishers, right? There are small publishers, and there is a trend to open everything, open access on both sides, open data, open code. So how you perceive this conflict between business and the trend to open everything and make it as cheap as possible?
Yeah, so I mean, it's difficult for me to discuss this kind of these opposite poles of the system or of the concepts from a business model, because I don't, to be honest, I don't know very much about the business model of publish. Well, I know the business model, but I don't know what consequences that would have maybe for Elsevier, Wiley, Springer. But on a conceptual level, I mean, of course, this is a very good idea to have as much open science as possible. So I mean, science and scientific results, especially those that are generated by publicly funded institutions, they should be made open. That's the whole point. And I mean, that's also why we started publishing stuff in the first place. And so I think the system has gotten a bit off track in the sense that the publishing model has actually excluded large parts of the public from reading publications, and so I welcome all these initiatives that go towards fair, open data, open software, open source software, open whatsoever, and I don't see that they are an imminent threat for the business model of publishers, and I also honestly don't think that one should be too worried about the large publishers, because I think they know their business very well.
Okay, thanks. So we are heading to the end of the interview. Before we end, could you provide some piece of advice to early career scientists in terms of publication? So what should they privilege, or what could they do better to produce better quality science? I don't know, any piece of advice would be valuable.
It's very, I mean, I'm always hesitant to give that
course.
kind of advice, because first of all, it sounds like well, I know how it's done. I think this is very, very individual. What I think is what's always a very good piece of advice is that you try to learn during your PhD time, for example, how your scientific community operates, right? Because I think it's also very community specific. And I see that surprisingly quite a few young researchers, also those who are doing great research, publishing maybe, that sometimes they don't really try to get to know their scientific community too much. And I think this is very important. And of course, PhD advisors, senior colleagues like me, that they are important in helping them understand and learn how the community operates, because based on this knowledge you can then make your individual decision as a young researcher. Do I want to go for more paper in like a high esteemed journal? Do I want to go for this or that? What will be the effect on my career? Because this decision you then have to take by yourself, but it's important that you're well informed. And that would be the advice that I would give to anyone, both the advisors but also the young researchers, to learn as much as you can about your community.
Okay, thanks. And to wrap up, with the emergence of generative AI, many things change for knowledge workers, right? For science as well. So what do you expect, which changes do you expect in the near future for authors, for scientific publications, and on the editor side as well?
Again, extremely difficult, of course, to project into the future. I mean, I think there's already a lot of things and effects that we see that generative AI has now, and that large language models have right now, and in the way that, for example, we use it. I mean, I'm using it in my daily life, also in my research or in my professional life, and also the first thing is, I think it's naive to tell young researchers not to use it, right? I mean, because it's a tool, it's out there, it will be used. So that would be naive. So I think, again, it's important to educate young researchers on how they can hopefully use those tools in a beneficial way, and also in a morally acceptable way, right? So of course it's not acceptable, even if maybe you could get lucky by letting large parts of a study or a paper be just written or generated by a large language model. Even if you had the possibility that this might go through, I mean, still it's morally not acceptable. So again, I think it's about giving those thoughts to the young researchers, and then they have to decide how they shape the future.
Okay, but more on the editor side, do you think that it's possible that, for example, review will be done completely by AI, and big publishers or other publishers can just get rid of this overburden with looking for reviewers and so on, human reviewers?
So no, at the moment this is a clear no, and I also think that it will remain a clear no for me for quite some while, because again, I'm not an expert on how those models really work, but I know something, and I would come to the conclusion that they cannot make this assessment really based on a scientifically valid basis. So I highly recommend that there should be more possibilities in the future that AI is used in supporting all those processes, the editorial process, also the reviewing process, maybe also not maybe, but also the paper writing process. It's not wrong, I think, to have AI assist there, for example, in improving language here and there, and reformulating stuff and checking things and making equations look nice and coherent. So there's plenty of room where these AI tools can help, but at the end of the day, these decisions on whether to accept or to reject a paper, how to formulate a scientific novelty, and how to carve out a scientific novelty if you publish, we have to take those decisions, because I think the AI cannot.
Okay. Thank you very much, Alex.
Sure.